They're really, really delightful people, and thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. Please help me welcome Omar and Ahmet.
Well, first off, we want to thank you all for having us here. We're very, very excited to be here. We spent a little bit of time at the school yesterday setting up for the exhibition, and some time today meeting with students and faculty, and we're just so kind of delighted and impressed by the school that you all have and the leadership that you all have. So thank you so much for being here. We hope, well, it's kind of nice that you're not in studio right now too, so that's hopefully this will be exciting for you all. Okay, so without further ado, our practice is called No Office, and this talk today that we're going to give is called Domestic Grounds. The kind of title of this talk is really kind of talking about our disparate research and how it comes together. A lot of Omar's research that he undertakes talks about kind of housing in the domestic kind of realm, and mine is more kind of landscape driven, talking about things like land and territory and issues surrounding that. So this is kind of a way, we have our separate research, but this is a way that we kind of weave in both of our kind of expertise into our practice that's based in Syracuse. So again, my name is Namet.
I'm Omar.
And thanks again for being here. So a bit about our kind of working methodology. We're both kind of academics, and so we are teachers, and we're over at Syracuse School of Architecture. We do a lot of research and kind of teaching in that kind of realm, and then on the other realm is practice. And so traditionally these things sometimes feel kind of at odds. A lot of times when people ask us, they ask, are you in practice or are you kind of an academic or in research? And we like to say we're a little bit of both. And so we look at it kind of as a spectrum, and the way we work is we work through a lot of different ways of kind of disseminating information across that kind of spectrum. And so on the practice end, you know, we have built work that we're undertaking in Syracuse, and we undertook some in Dallas and in New Orleans. We also work through kind of competitions and speculative design work. A part of that is then disseminating some of that work through lectures like here today, conferences, exhibitions like we have outside, and product design. And then more on the research end that we also undertake is a lot of kind of peer-reviewed writing, books, workshops, and then we teach seminars. And then we also have kind of grant-funded research. And so a lot of that is kind of the spectrum, and there's gradient that we're constantly kind of moving back and forth. And we like to think that, you know, one informs the other and kind of vice versa.
So we're just going to show 5 projects today, but the exhibition outside is actually a collection of all of our work from the last 5 years. So there might be some things that we don't discuss fully in the lecture, but we're happy to talk to you about anything that interests you in the exhibition outside. So the first project is called A House in the Delta, and it's located here. This is the Ganges Delta, so this is Bangladesh. This is the site right here. This is Chittagong, which is a kind of bay city. And up north is the most dense city in the world, Dhaka. So this is not in the kind of the density that you're maybe used to seeing from places in the global south, especially in this region. It's a little bit more kind of spread out, more tropical. And what you're looking at here on the screen is the constant inundation of the site. So the water is always moving and it's always changing. This Google satellite image kind of shows that, because that sort of pale green is where the water is constantly kind of growing in and out of. And this is a map we found from 1778, which was showing like that landmass as it was back in that time. So you can see that it's actually changed quite a bit even from then. And this was something that really engaged us in the project early on. We actually got an amazing question from one of the students that Sandra hooked us up with for lunch. The question was like, how do you integrate research in the practice? And this is something that we like to do with every project, is we like to engage it in terms of research before we even put pen to paper, or even a sketch or anything like that. We like to delve deeply in the site contextual relationships and things like this, and learning about the area, right? So Namet is actually Bangladeshi, like in terms of her heritage, but she's only been a handful of times, so we really had to kind of dig in deep. This is what the site looks like. So it's kind of surrounded by water, very tropical, lots of greenery, a lot of kind of structures along the water's edge, along the coast. We're actually working on a project now that's looking at kind of housing for these areas. And this is our site. More particularly, it's like kind of here-ish, yeah. And it's, as you can see, it is a kind of urban environment, but this is not even close to the density of Taka. It's actually quite low rise in this area. And we love the site because it's kind of away from all of the kind of, I don't know, all of the dense kind of hustle and bustle that's going on outside. And as we weren't able to visit the site in person, we kind of did a Google Street walkthrough. So you can see that low rise density and all of that, and then the actual site itself is more of like a courtyard condition. And these are pictures, photographs from the site itself. So the client has been kind of hoarding masonry material for many years. So we devised this strategy for reusing that material and forming large scale, almost upscaled bricks, which we can show here in a second. And so one thing that's really important to us also is to show process. You know, architecture just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Like, you actually have to think about things, you have to draw, you have to sketch, you have to make models, you have to think about things in a lot of different ways. And these are not the most beautiful sketches, but it was the way that we kind of entered the project. So the client came to us with this proposition. They're actually American, so his heritage is in Bangladesh, but he hadn't lived there for maybe 20, 30 years. And he married an American woman, but they wanted to move back to live their kind of retirement out in Bangladesh. But he was also dealing with a lot of health issues, and so there was going to be a live-in kind of caretaker, which is really common in this part of the world, is to have kind of a domestic laborer live with you, but a lot of times they kind of live separately and they live in a separate structure. Maybe it's not as well conceived as the house, but they were really clear with us, upfront with us, about they wanted that to be like kind of a shared dwelling, a collective dwelling for all of them. So the problem that we were dealing with was like a kind of main quarter, and then a kind of shared band, and then a private living quarters for the live-in caretaker. And so we were starting to work through that, and these are some sketch models that we made for that to be one kind of collective form. And this was totally just a sketch, and then we had to draw it out a lot further. But this kind of boiled down those different ideas into one structure. It's kind of up off the ground. There's these 3 separate wings, and they're all shared under one roof. And this is a model one that we have out there in the atrium gallery now. It's high density foam, and that was the color. We loved the color of it actually, so we didn't paint it or anything, just kept it as is. This is the site, so you can see that kind of courtyard condition, and then we have separate patios within that. And the patio home is a really typical typology for this region because it allows for passive cooling, ventilation, and passive daylighting, as well as it's a kind of like shared collective space for all the inhabitants of the dwelling. And this is another view of the site and the building there in the site. We have this entry plinth here, which kind of collects the people before they enter into their separate entrances, and then a kind of screen wall that allows for some separation between the outside and the inside. And that's going to be a common thread throughout this project, is kind of creating a gradient between the inside and the outside, and the private and the public. This is the floor plan, so you can see a little bit how we resolved that kind of issue of like having 2 separate dwellings under one roof, and so you can get a sense of that. And the two courtyards are really just one big courtyard. It's just a way to like kind of collect people and collect space, and it also becomes the space of domestic labor. There's a lot of outdoor cooking, hanging your clothes to dry, which is super common. They don't really use dryers and things like this. And you spend a lot of time outdoors. It's really a big part of the culture there. So we wanted to create a kind of space that's insulated somewhat, but there is a kind of gradient from the outside to the inside. Here's the section, so you can see the live area here, and then the care area here on the right, and then that shared courtyard in the middle. And then these passive ventilation, drainage, and daylighting strategies that were basically used to design the whole house. So one thing that was really important to us was like the roof was a kind of wrapper and a kind of shelter, but it was pretty rare that that spaces were actually enclosed, like with a ceiling. The only spaces actually truly enclosed are the bathroom and maybe like one or two other spaces that needed to be sheltered, but everything else is kind of open. So air is allowed to freely move through the space, and daylight is coming in from all 360. And this is a worm's eye view showing the way that we're thinking about the project tectonically. So there's a kind of, everything is lifted up off the ground with a concrete stem wall, and then those large scale bricks above, and then a really light frame timber roof that basically can fly away anytime there's a monsoon. and then the building stays put, but there's no roof. We had this idea, this kind of poetic idea of that. I'll zoom in of that. And then, so unfortunately, so as I mentioned, the client actually had a terminal illness, and we had met with the clients many times. We actually designed the whole project with them, but unfortunately he did pass away. So we thought it was important for his wife especially to give a set of renderings that maybe brought the project to life in a way that the drawings and models didn't. So we worked with a really amazing render group called OK Render out of Chicago, and they helped. This is our process of working through these views, picking the right view and picking the right kind of setting for those. So this is a view of that entry plinth area, and you see that kind of brick wall made from the masonry that we found on site, and then this light timber roof, and lots of kind of vegetation and greenery. And this is a view from the courtyard looking towards the main living structure. So there's that screen wall kind of celosia type of moment happening at the front, which is super common. In this region, we call it jali. Jali is a kind of screen that filters light and air and creates a kind of gradient between the outside and the inside. And then you can see that kind of domestic labor and maybe a place to have your coffee. And it really is this lush, by the way. It's not just a rendering thing, but it is quite lush there. We love this view of a render where he was kind of building the model, and there's this tree on site. So it was almost like imagining that the house is kind of built around the tree, and then the view that comes from there. And you can see that sloped roof there in the structure. And then the interior, which was a really nice moment for us to kind of mix the Western and non-Western kind of sensibilities. So they are American, they lived here for many, many years. So all of their stuff happened to be super Western, but the house itself is kind of something that is of that place. And so we really liked that dichotomy and wanted to play it up in the views. That's our dog, Dahlia. A big fan of Josh. And here's the final view, just looking out from the bedroom, looking out into the courtyard.
All right, so the next project we're going to talk about is called Freeway Futures. So as we kind of spoke at the beginning, we have the kind of practice which you saw in the previous project. This one was really kind of research that we undertook through a series of kind of grant funding processes. And so we also believe it's really important to kind of work locally. So our firm is based in Syracuse, New York. And and so some of the kind of funding we received was through the kind of Architectural League, through NISCA, and then also the College of Engineering and Computer Science. And it was a collaboration actually between us, an urbanist, and then a landscape architect over from ESF, which is a kind of a neighboring program right next to this university. And so we started, of course, as you'll kind of start seeing a theme here of research enabling us at the very beginning of each project by studying the kind of city. There is slated to be, and it's actually currently happening, the demolition of the I-81 viaduct, which is a very kind of divisive infrastructure that kind of cuts and bisects our city. It's very kind of a typical condition across the United States. And so we started by studying actually the 15th Ward, which was a historically Black community that was very much thriving and quite successful. And what happened is over time they essentially kind of cut the neighborhood with that highway. So you see in this image here, this is from the I think the Onondaga archives, but it's starting to kind of demo the kind of periphery of that neighborhood and really kind of putting this idea of divisive infrastructure that bisects the neighborhood itself, which led to a whole host of kind of social, economic, and political kind of issues for that kind of community. And so this is kind of what the kind of viaduct is right now. It's this kind of long linear, I guess, entity within the city that you are very kind of clear if you're on the west of it and in the east of it. And there's a lot of kind of unspoken biases, I would say, in which kind of side of the highway you live and things like that. And so our kind of proposition is this thing is coming down. And instead of, imagining a framework for the entirety of the viaduct's kind of area, we actually suggested having zones of inquiry. And so what you see here are 5 different typologies within the kind of viaduct and looking at kind of key intersections and understanding how those would work. And so here you start to see a framework where we're starting to look at projective sites, existing conditions, and then everything that's kind of in between. And so this was the kind of existing condition. You can see this kind of viaduct just floating. Everything around it is actually quite bare. You have a lot of kind of vacant lots. You have a lot of parking. Again, it's very not used really throughout the city. No one's really crossing that boundary. And so our idea was to look at kind of strategies of landscape, for instance. So right now the kind of site is quite bare. So looking at things like kind of reintroducing biodiversity, looking at the idea of permeable paving, storm water detention, as well as bioswale. So the idea of, there's a lot of kind of hardscape right now. We are like weirdly really obsessed about drainage and where water goes in our city.
Right, because we lived in New Orleans.
Yeah, we lived in New Orleans, I lived in Houston, and so this is always kind of at the forefront of my mind that we want kind of ground to be spongy and accept water. And so that was like a big thing where there's this huge kind of really non-porous structure there for so long. And if you're able to kind of drive under, it just is surrounded by this idea of kind of impermeable paving. And so we started introducing kind of key landscape strategies, working closely with the landscape architect, as well as different kind of ideas of reuse strategies. And so actually proposing keeping a few of the kind of existing structures and columns and using some of the debris to actually start to construct the terracing that we were proposing. So not everything is going to end up in a landfill site, rather reusing some of the kind of components, using the kind of piers as like a shade structure or the rubble as fill for a pile, we thought could be an interesting strategy of reuse. And so what you're starting to see here is our proposal. So you see dashed in kind of really lightly where the viaduct was, and these red kind of columns are from actually the viaduct themselves. But starting to create a space that is a little bit more kind of community focused. And each of these kind of proposals are really responsive to the context around it. And so let's see. Here you're kind of accompanied by the kind of hospital and a lot of living. And so our proposal here was to introduce a series of kind of courts and recreational facilities to help engage the site around it. So again, creating and defining amenities for the sites that they kind of touch. And of course, I don't know if you all have this problem a whole lot, but in Syracuse, and I didn't know this before we moved there, but it's the snowiest city in the country. They don't tell you that before you move there. For good reason. So thinking beyond just, pretty summer days, but thinking about the kind of cold winters and how we can kind of interface with the site was also important because we haven't seen the sun in about 5 months yet. So thinking about kind of seasonality was also a way to approach this idea of site-specific research and kind of proposal. And then this one here is Pioneer Homes, the pink kind of down there, and that's historically black and brown kind of housing for marginalized communities. And so a lot of the kind of proposal with the viaduct coming down is proposing to tear down all of those kind of housing units, and I think they were actually the first social affordable housing within the state, public housing within the state of New York. So they were quite significant, and of course they were slated for demolition, and so our idea was to keep it and provide amenity kind of to support that. And you start to see community gardens and shelters and things like that around there. And then we were looking kind of south, where South kind of campus is this idea of a series of field research stations. So bringing back biodiversity and having kind of moments or pavilions where we're able to then study the kind of landscape strategies and kind of gauge how well they work and what's not working effectively. And this was all a part of a booklet that we put together that we submitted. And one of our favorite things is drawing. Hopefully that's kind of a theme that you're starting to sense here. So we were really kind of interested in thinking about, and I'm assuming like every professor here is probably like obsessed with like how you draw your people and your trees and your scaled figures and all of that stuff. So you can start to see here that we're very kind of interested in how people interface with the kind of landscape, how we showcase people. What does a squirrel look like in our drawings? And so kind of really this idea of like world building through drawing is something that we're really interested in.
Yeah. So switching gears, I mean, we did talk to Josh and we were like, what should we show? And he was like, show a bunch of different stuff. So that's what we're doing. This is another project that is under construction in Syracuse right now. So we have 2 projects under construction as well as other ones that are in development. And it's called A Plot and a Half. And so before I get into why it's called that, this is a partnership between us and a local community activist who approached us about doing this project with the land bank. So the Greater Syracuse Land Bank is an entity that was started several years ago, basically to take stock of all of the vacant and underused property and basically delinquent property in Syracuse. So you can see here on this map that that's quite a lot of the property that's available. The university is here, so if it gives you a sense of like basically a lot of the land around the university is a lot of this kind of underutilized houses and things like this. And just to be clear, it's not displacing anyone. It's property that has been vacant, abandoned, and delinquent for more than 20 years. And so if you can read it, I don't know, it's a little hard to make it out, but a lot of these properties are kind of listed for like $4,000, $5,000, $10,000. So our client bought this house for $9,000. And that is what I'll show you, how we're developing it. But it's a great opportunity for the city, and especially for people who are from there, which our client is. So the reason we've called this a plot and a half is that there is the plot where the house sits is here, but then there's this like bonus space that's like here to the west, and that is going to become a community garden that will be available for everyone of that area. And it's really needed because it is a kind of food desert, and the only thing around there is kind of these bodegas and things like this. You can't really get fresh fruit or any kind of fresh vegetables, so it'll be a kind of offering for the city. And the house itself is also thought of as a kind of community house because she has a separate place that she actually lives in Ithaca. She's a student at Cornell, and this house will be a kind of community house. And so we thought like we could take this a little bit further by not just thinking about the single plot on the land, but actually thinking about the greater impact or the greater kind of equitable justice that can come through it. And so we're thinking about this idea of cooperation, the pooling of resources, stewardship of the land, and shared governance, how it relates to maybe this plot of land. And thinking actually about a community land trust model that could be created out of these different land bank properties. So instead of these just individual homes that people are buying and maybe renovating on their own, actually coming together and creating a network through that with a community land trust, so that the property value is kind of locked in and it remains affordable, and it's not a vehicle for gentrification, but it's actually a way to keep people in their neighborhoods and not displace people. And so just zooming in now on the project itself, the existing plot and the existing house was basically unusable. Like everything was rotted away. There was asbestos. The floors were completely rotted. So we were thinking like it's probably worth it just to do a kind of gut renovation. And one big issue with this building is that the bedrooms, as you can see here, are like single twin size beds, so like almost like a dormitory style living. And so the client actually had this idea to just mirror that and actually use the larger spaces like the dining and the kitchen and the living as the bedroom spaces, and then to have a nice long kind of galley kitchen that runs the full length of the house, almost like a shotgun style home in New Orleans, if you're familiar with that. So there's like 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and then this space at the front is a kind of community organizing space where she and others in the community will host community events and community meetings, as she's like super involved with with the city of Syracuse as a native of that place. So essentially, this was like a kind of illegal addition. So we actually just like bumped out the project and did it the proper way. So that's under construction now. And here's a section of that space. So the way that we like to work is trying to keep as much as possible of the existing structure, but also like bringing light into this main kitchen space was really important. So the rafters are going to remain in the space, but we're just going to cut a couple of holes to bring light in. And really there's only 1 or 2 new windows in the whole building. We're trying to keep the punched openings exactly where they are. That's how we designed the plan, just to kind of keep the windows where they are to minimize costs. But our client is also like super, resilient and innovative, and she got like $100,000+ of money to renovate the house just by like going and applying for different grants. So all of the community garden and all of the earthwork is paid for by a separate grant that she had applied for. And here's a kind of diagram of the interior layout. So you can see like this kind of thick wall here is providing the service for all of the spaces within the bedrooms, but also out in the corridor where the kitchen is. And these are a couple of views of that main kind of spine that runs through the whole house. And that's the one new window that we proposed, a nice 4x4 window in the kitchen, so that she can look out while she's cooking.
All right, this next project, I don't know if you're allowed to have like a favorite project, like you can't have a favorite kid, but I have a favorite project, and this is one of my favorite projects. It's a project that had almost no budget. We were in the midst of evacuating from New Orleans during a hurricane when the install was happening in Chicago. We had just moved there, we had just gotten a puppy, things were really hard, and maybe that's why I love this project so much. This project is called Within Without. We applied to this kind of landscape residency in Chicago, and it was called Space P11, and it is a gallery that's actually in the Pedway in Chicago. Is anyone from Chicago? It's this whole underground network that is called the Pedway, right under the downtown of Chicago. And this is a gallery space that's kind of located beneath that. And this was all happening, this was like a partner project with the Chicago Architectural Biennial. And so a lot of folks would kind of come through, go up from the city down into that kind of Pedway space for this exhibition. And so when we started the project, we were really interested in this idea of context and what that meant. And so if you're working kind of underground, we were really curious about the conditions around us. And so through a little bit of research, we actually found out, through a lot of bit of research, we found out that much of the city of Chicago was actually built up with geofoam. And that's what you actually are seeing here. It's this really, we knew nothing about it when we found this out. We were like, what is geofoam? But it's this really cool material that has a lot of kind of capacity for weight. And so all of the kind of underground parking and stuff like that, if you go to Millennium Park, all of that stuff is then supported with this geofoam, and that's kind of what you start to see here. So they're enormously big blocks, but they're actually quite lightweight. And so it's kind of a sea of geofoam around it. So that was the kind of context that we were working within. And so our idea was actually to expose this context within the kind of gallery. So what you're seeing is the kind of a plan oblique, but it's essentially a very modest, small gallery space. And the idea was to then extrude the kind of geofoam up to show the kind of hidden context within the gallery space. And one thing that we really loved about it, I don't know that a lot of people got it, but we really loved it. But when you would actually walk by, you would just see kind of this idea of like blankness. It was like this blank wall that a lot of people were like, what is that? What am I looking at? And it wasn't until you actually kind of went in there that you started to understand that this thing was starting to kind of carve space and define a space within the small kind of gallery. And so during the kind of the big installation opening, we designed these kind of pamphlets that you start to see here that had the drawings, some of the writing that we did. And then you can see here, this is actually like a deep section. If you turn your head this way, that's the geofoam down below. And then you see some feet and some animals there up above with the city above. And so with every kind of installation, there was so much kind of hidden labor and hard work. I would say a lot of sweat, not so many tears, but the geofoam blocks arrived on site. Again, they were massive, massive, massive. We unpacked them and we started the install process. And one way to cut down the geofoam was we had this 10-foot, do you all use like foam cutters in studio? Yes, kind of. Make sure you wear a mask. But we had a 10-foot size one that we would kind of work back and forth to cut down the geofoam. And so you're starting to see a little bit of the process here. And it definitely felt like you were underground. And so this was the kind of result of it, where you walk in and there was just the sea of blankness and white, and you really didn't understand where you were. It was kind of strange. And there was this really odd coating on the geoform that you start to see here, that kind of black mark there. And that was the kind of, like when you look at like lumber and stuff like that, it's like the kind of structural, I guess, integrity and what it can handle and things like that. So it had that information stamped on every geofoam block, but beyond that, there was kind of no demarcation or anything like that. So it was quite a very like strange experience to be underground, kind of surrounded by this idea of blankness.
Maybe one more note on that, because I love this part of the project. Like, we were really interested in circularity, because a lot of times people would do stuff in this space and it would just like, all of the material would just go into the landfill. And so we, from the beginning, like, we wanted to use material that wouldn't just be straight to the landfill, but actually could be reused. So we both worked in Chicago. Namet worked at Studio Gang. I worked at a firm called Urban Lab. And Urban Lab did a lot of green roof projects. We actually just finished a living wall project, so it was like a kind of green wall, I suppose. And that landscape firm, we talked to them ahead of time, and they took all the geofoam from here for us, and then it ended up in a green roof, just like a few blocks away from here in one of these big towers in Chicago. So I thought that was a really nice way to kind of, I don't know, just put a finer point on the project. But that's why research is important. Mm-hmm. It's important to start with research. Okay, so I think this is the last project, and it's maybe the most current one, because we're still working on it now, and unfortunately going through some design changes, but we can talk about that later. So this is called A House Among the Trees, and this is a 14-acre plot just northwest of Syracuse in a place called Baldwinsville. So, I mean, I don't think anyone here is from Syracuse. I know Sandra had spent some time there. This is the Beaver Lake Nature Center just across the street. So it's a very beautiful, kind of heavily wooded site with a lot of biodiversity, a lot of flora, a lot of fauna, and bird watching is super popular in this area. And so, again, we kind of delved in with some research. So first we went to visit the site with the clients. It's really hard to get there, actually, because there's so many trees. They're hundreds of feet tall, and so the canopy is actually quite beautiful, and the light that comes in is dappled light, so it makes for a really nice setting, especially for a house. And before we even started any design, as always, we like to do a lot of research. So we found all of the flora and fauna, the natural elements of the site. Our clients had some questions about a few of these, but I think we were able to prove that we were right about it. And we also used this kind of archiving and this indexing to think about trees that we could potentially cut down and reuse the material for within the house, and trees that we for sure want to keep. So that was really important for us to do. And we're also designing with sound, thinking about the types of birds in the area and what types of sounds do they make and the little critters, and making sure that we're just keeping or being aware of all of that.
There's strangely a lot of squirrels in this presentation, like a proportionately.
Yeah, maybe it's because our 2-year-old loves squirrels, as Josh was saying. He calls him Uncle Josh. It's really cute. So before we get to where we are now, again, process is super important to us. So we came up with probably too many different ideas for what their house might look like. So we had a kind of patio house or courtyard house example, like similar to the house in the Delta. And we had a kind of more linear example with a kind of bend to it. And then one idea with these kind of scattered courtyards. And so we just played out these different ideas. And again, like we talked to the clients, we wanted to understand how they live and like what kind of house would be right for them. And so these kinds of sketch models and things like this is for the students really, are really important to do, because then you can have a conversation about all of that. And what we ended up with was a kind of more linear model with like a bend to it. So you can kind of see the diagram of the project in this model here. These models were made by Andy. Thanks, Andy. And so you can see here that there's kind of 3 separate volumes that make up the overall length of the project. So this volume is a garage, but with a studio above it. This is the main living volume with a kind of primary suite, the living, dining, kitchen, as well as a kind of bar of program, like pantry, office, powder bath, and things like this. And then a kind of completely separate wing for guests. So they have 2 adult children that are also in college, like you guys are. But they like to come and visit their parents pretty often, but they're not always there. So that it was important for them to be able to keep that wing of the house completely separate, so that they could shut it down and they could keep it on a completely different power system and grid, and that was really a big part of the project. And then it's hard to point with this thing, but these kind of 2 interstitial or kind of in-between wings are passively cooled and heated, so they're not on the active system. They're kind of like a in-between space, that more like a screened porch or something like this. And this is a view of the models, beautiful view, showing our structural strategy. So again, we were talking with the students who are like really inquisitive and had good questions, but it's really important for us to really think about everything as one comprehensive whole. So the structure isn't this thing that comes later, but it's actually something that we like it to be a part of the project from the beginning. So we designed these shear walls that you can kind of see here that run transversely across the length of the project, that provide the structure to free the kind of longer span spaces from columns and things like this. So most of the load is carried with those shear walls, and that also makes the roof really thin and light, so it doesn't have to be super heavy, and it can actually like kind of be a beautiful thin gesture. This is the site here. Actually, it's like a kind of drop-off point that we walked the site and we actually like staked out where we wanted the project. There was already a clearing of trees in this area, so that was really good for us. But there's an elevation drop from here to here about 6 to 7 feet. So it's kind of pointing out towards the landscape, and that was something that was really important to the clients. And there's a kind of creek that's off to the corner of the side over here. It's not really a creek, but you know, in terms of landscape, that is where the topography is dipping towards. And this is the plan, so you can see that diagram coming through a lot clearer here. The kind of garage space with the studio above it, the main living space, and then these kind of interstitial spaces here that are more like kind of sunrooms or screened-in porches, and then the kind of separate living quarters off to the side. And we do this a lot, but we like to kind of keep all the systems in one place. So we have to the north side, sorry, this pointer keeps turning on and off, but we have a lot of the systems kind of contained in that top corner, with the 1 courtyard to the south and 1 courtyard to the north to allow for the entry. Also, like with clients, they have idiosyncrasies. This piano was like a non-negotiable. They wanted a space for the piano, and we were like, I mean, that's a pretty big room just for a piano. They're like, no, that's it, that's right. Like, okay, sounds good. And here's the section. The section is showing the roof is super thick right now. We've actually redesigned it to be like quite thin, but there's like a quite large skylight on the south side, which you'll see in the views. Yeah, there's the skylight there. So as you can see, like it's really divided in these 3 separate wings that have these kind of interstitial zones in between, but the roof kind of makes it feel like one building, and that was really important for us and also for the clients to feel like it's one kind of complete gesture and not like these 3 separate volumes. They liked our work, so we've actually been commissioned to do a couple of other structures on the site. So in line with this kind of oblique structure here, there will be another structure that's for a fancy car and hobbies and things like this, and then one to the south that would be like all of the infrastructure for the pool. And you know, this is a big site, so not a snow blower, but a full like kind of snow plow. Yeah, as well as a couple of other recreational things. And here's another view of that model. So this view shows that kind of like the logic of the structure as it moves through, and then the roof, how it caps it off with this expressive skylight courtyard. And then some beautiful views by Dalvin, our student back there. Just showing how the house is pretty much encompassed by the trees. We're designing a material system now, a kind of oversized shingle that's charred and then with a clear coat to allow the building to really like kind of blend into the landscape and not be this kind of harsh kind of counterpoint to it, but something that really sits within the trees. So we're currently working on material iterations and doing some material studies. We're also working with a colleague of ours on figuring out the thermal systems and things like that. There's going to be geothermal walls as well as solar panels, not on this structure, but some of the other structures will have solar paneling and things like this.
And there's that piano, in case you were wondering.
Oh yeah, the piano is very important. It can't be lost. There it is. And this is the kind of entry courtyard as you're entering. There's no piano there, thanks, Dobbin. We asked her to take it out. We didn't like it. Yeah, but the entry is here. It kind of enters into this gray zone between active and passive systems. And then the interior with that large circular skylight, which we're trying to source right now, and a really simple, minimal kitchen. Everything is kind of contained within this wall. So, and it's all like kind of panel ready doors and things like this. So it's all like one kind of continuous gesture. And here's a view from the model looking towards one of the courtyards. It's not a floor plan. Okay.
All right, and so we're leaving you with this kind of GIF. It's actually one big drawing that we've kind of zoomed in on. It was this like prompt that we like to end with this because it just is like, you know when you just draw for fun?
No.
It's silent. Well, eventually you'll get to a place where you draw for fun because you love it so much. I guarantee it. So this was a kind of a prompt. The kind of prompt was like, draw a house in a storm. And we were like, what does that even mean?
It's Japanese. Yeah.
It was a Japanese
super
competition.
poetic,
It was like, yeah, incredibly poetic and thoughtful. And so we actually did, again, a little bit of research and learned about this kind of idea of ikebana. Does anyone know what that is? Yeah. It's, for those of you who don't, it's this really beautiful kind of way and logic of how to arrange plants. And so we imagine this house, kind of these disparate kind of floating pieces amongst this kind of floral arrangement. And we were also really inspired by Jeff Wall's A Sudden Gust of Wind. Do you all know that photograph? It's like the guy in the business suit with the papers flying away. And so our idea to Storm House was like, there's this storm, this imminent storm kind of coming, and everything is just kind of blowing with the wind. And so and then we pointed out yesterday that there's a cow that is really kind of about that Twister movie, but that's a whole other conversation. Come talk to me about the cow. So if you're kind of interested about the kind of work, you're welcome to visit our website. I think we probably update our Instagram more often, but that's probably more recent work. But yeah, thank you so much. Anything else? Okay.
Hopefully there's time for questions.
Yeah.
We tried to keep 10 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes, okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you.